Слава Господу, что мы здесь все вместе можем быть. Сегодня будем прославлять Господа. Сегодня служение будет на английском языке, поэтому кому нужен перевод, и кто не взял наушники, вы можете сейчас это сделать. После молитвы подойти, взять наушники, мы помолимся. Господь, дорогой, мы благодарны Тебе, благодарны от всего сердца, от всей души, что Ты продлил к нам милость свою, и что в этот вечер мы можем вновь собраться у ног Твоих, пред лицом Твоим, мы можем поклониться святому имени Твоему. Господь, и мы хотим, чтобы Ты наполнил нас Духом Твоим, наполнил нас Словом Твоим, и чтобы, Господи, в этот вечер из наших уст и из наших сердец Тебе была подобающая слава. Господь, прибудь с нами по своему верному обещанию и благослови нас всех Твоим благословением, и пусть Тебе будет хвала и честь и поклонение. Аминь.
Christ on the road to Church, you may be seated, and we're going to have our kids' ministry next.
Так, детки, проходим вперед. Кто готовился сегодня?
Whenever I'm afraid, I will trust in you.
Аминь.
Amen. God will support me and not let me fall. 1 Peter 5:10.
Аминь.
Ко мне обратитесь и будьте спасены все края земли, ибо я Бог и нет другого. Исайя 45:22. Аминь.
Аминь. Молодец.
All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. John 1:3.
Аминь. Молодец.
Давайте забудем горе и грусть. Сегодня родился младенец Иисус. Родился он ночью в глубокой пещере. Его окружали лишь люди и звери. Стояли сторонки и тихо глядели. А чудо такое в святом Вифлееме. Мами.
Одну бери. Так, детки. Что сегодня утром было? Кто мне скажет? После собрания, вернее, во время собрания, что было у детей сегодня? Ярмарка понравилась? Так я вот хотел сказать, что ярмарка здесь, кто выходит сюда рассказывать, будет в конце февраля. Я хотел сказать, больше родителям напомнить, кто монетки дети, наверное, потеряли уже. Подойдите ко мне, мы решим эту проблему. Мы хотим записывать имена и отмечать, сколько монеток у кого. Окей? В конце февраля будет ярмарка здесь тоже. Теперь я хотел спросить у вас вопрос. Когда мы принимаем решения в нашей жизни, как мы принимаем решения? Вот, например, вы, если принимаете решение, что-то надо сделать, да? Как вы принимаете? Не думая, вот раз понесли, сделаем что-то, или стоим, задумываемся, что будет, когда я что-то сделаю. Например, в моей жизни я много раз делал решения, не думая. Как-то я был таким где-то, не знаю, 9-10 лет, и там на улице пацаны построили такую горку, чтобы на велике прыгать. Я не подумал, что будет, когда я со всей скоростью перелечу через это. Сел и с горки со всей скорости пришел домой весь ободратый, в крови. После этого, когда такие вещи где-то строились, я уже начал задумываться, что будет, когда со всей скорости через что-то прыгнешь. Я хотел спросить, мы принимаем решения в нашей жизни, мы думаем о том, что если я это или это сделаю, что будет потом, как люди на меня посмотрят, или мы просто делаем, не задумываясь. Я хотел бы сказать, какие бы решения мы в жизни не принимаем, очень важно одну вещь помнить, чтобы мы обращались к Богу за советом. Если мы хотим что-то сделать, мы в молитве обращаемся к Богу и спрашиваем, я хочу вот это или это сделать, как мне лучше поступить? И поверьте, Бог всегда поможет нам выбрать правильное решение, потому что Бог нас любит, и Бог хочет, чтобы у нас всегда было все хорошо, и потому Он нам даст самый лучший совет. Аминь. Помолимся.
Dear Lord, thank you for this day that we can come and praise your name at church and we can learn stuff. Amen.
Бог, спасибо за этот день, спасибо, что ты нас привез в Дом Божий, помоги, что мы еще и еще от тебя учились, и спасибо за все ты нам дал. Аминь.
Аминь. Отец дорогой, благодарю Тебя за этот вечер, за то, что мы можем быть здесь, Господи. Я прошу Тебя, Господь, помоги нам всем, когда мы принимаем решение, Господи, советоваться с Тобой, потому что Ты видишь наше будущее, и Ты хочешь только самое лучшее для нас, Господи. Прошу Тебя во имя Иисуса Христа. Аминь.
Приветствую вас, братья и сестры. Good evening, brothers and sisters. I am absolutely excited and thrilled to be here today, to be preaching on this amazing topic that we will be covering today. The topic that most of us are very familiar with. Topic that all of us have heard much about. Jesus' prayer at Jesus' time in the Garden of Gethsemane. I'm pretty sure all of you are aware of the basic details of this passage and this story that occurred in this event. And in fact, it is such an important event that it is covered by all four of the Gospels. It is covered by both Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Which is rare, which doesn't always happen that we have every single story in the Bible covered by all four Gospels. And there's usually a certain criteria that there is for a passage to be highlighted like that and given so much attention. This is one of those important events. Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane is something that tends to be very close to a lot of Christians. You can't really read these passages without having some degree of emotion, because you can feel how Jesus was experiencing these events. You know, when Jesus is making miracles and when he's doing miracles, it's a little difficult maybe for us to relate to that because we are not capable of doing that. We're not capable of rising people from the dead. We're not capable of healing people, making them unblind, or those who are blind, making them see. We can't do those things. We can only look at those and revere them and look at them with awe. But when Jesus Christ goes through Gethsemane, we can relate to a lot of what he's going through there. We can't relate to quite the same extent that what he was going through, but we can relate to those emotions that he was experiencing, because at the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus Christ shows us his humanity. And we can relate to that because many of us have experienced some degree of those feelings that he was experiencing back then. So before we begin reading these passages, before we begin delving into this, I just want to give us a little bit of context, a context of what was happening before this event at the garden. And when we're going to be reading, we're going to be combining the passages of all four Gospels. What I found in digging in this and what I found in studying this is how deep these passages are. I made a comment to Pavel, our translator, earlier today that it's going to take me a little while because after looking through my notes, my sermon ended up being about 55 minutes long, and nobody wants to listen to me for 55 minutes, so I had to shorten it quite a bit. There's a lot to be said about the Garden of Gethsemane. It's a deep and rich story. So before we read the actual passages that have to do with what Jesus was experiencing there, let me give you a little bit of context, a context of what was occurring beforehand. So before the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus Christ was here with his disciples for 3 years, and at the latter stages of his ministry here, he was beginning to tell his disciples a lot about the fact that he will die. He was telling them that the Son of Man himself will need to die. Just 2 days prior to this event occurring, he told his disciples, in 2 days' time, I will be betrayed. So imagine you being a disciple with Jesus Christ. You walk with him for the past 3 years, and all of a sudden Jesus is starting to tell you that in 2 days' time, I will be betrayed and you will no longer see me. I will be killed. Imagine a loved one, your loved one, telling you these things. You have 2 days with me, and in 2 days I will die. Imagine the type of burden that would put on your heart. Somebody that you love, somebody that you've completely given up your life for. That's what the disciples did. And that's the context of what we're reading there. That Jesus just told them that he will die. And then Jesus Christ and the disciples meet for the Last Supper. It is called the Last Supper because that was exactly what it was. It was the last meal that Jesus had with his disciples, and he tells them this. During the Last Supper, he tells them that this is the last time we will be eating. He tells them that. And so now this is very real in their hearts. And then he tells them something more. He says, one of you will betray me. They're shocked to hear that. They know he was supposed to be betrayed, but this is the first time when he says, one of you will do so. So they look to each other, who's going to do this? And each of them say, not me, not me. It was Judas, but then Peter goes, I will never do this to you, Lord. And he goes, Peter, you will deny me. Now, Peter was one of their leaders. So imagine all of these things happening. Jesus is telling you he's going to die. That one of them is going to betray him imminently, right now. And then saying that one of our leaders here, Peter, who people looked up to, was the rock of the church, as Jesus ultimately gave him the authority to be. He will deny Jesus Christ 3 times. So they're hearing all these things, and it's under this emotion that we approach the Garden of Gethsemane. That's what happens next. What happened next is that after the Last Supper, they sang a hymn, and it says that they walked towards the Mount of Olives. Let us read Luke chapter 22. Luke chapter 22. Verse 39 and on. And he came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives. And the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and knelt down and prayed, saying, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed, more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping from sorrow. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation." This is just one account of this event that just occurred. Matthew, Mark give a more detailed account of that, and we will go into that in just a little bit. And John gives a little shortened account, but he says something very important there. And what I want to begin us to mention is Luke 22:39. One second. And he came out and went. He came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. Why did he go to the Garden of Gethsemane? It was a common practice for Jesus Christ to do that. This was a common spot where Jesus went to pray. It was a garden on the outskirts of town. It was a quiet place, a shaded area because of the olive trees that were there. And he went often there to pray. Now, another important thing to mention here is that Judas knew about this as well. Judas knew that this was a common practice for Jesus to do, to go to the garden to pray. And this was important. This is important because it shows that Jesus did not make an effort to evade or hide. He knew what was coming in the garden, and he didn't make an effort to hide away from it. He went to a place that Judas knew about. Judas knew this is where he's going to find him. And so he takes the 11 disciples, Judas being gone now, going to betray him. And he goes there. And Jesus has a soul that is full of anguish and sorrow. We talked about the disciples having sorrow in their hearts because they knew that they were about to lose their fellowship with Jesus. But Jesus knew something way more. He knew that he was about to be taking the wrath of God upon himself, the wrath of God for every sin, past, present, future. He was about to forsake for a moment, for a time, his fellowship with his Father. He was about to be smitten and crushed by the hand of God, as we read in Isaiah. And we read that Jesus, his soul was in anguish to the point of death, Matthew says. He was so stricken with this weight, this grief that on his heart, that he was literally near the point of physical death. And I want to mention that this is physical death we're talking about. And we'll explain, we'll go into why he was physically experiencing these things and why that's very important. Now, you can die from stress. I did a little bit of reading into this. WebMD, the source if you have any kind of symptom, if you want to check out. You can die from stress. There is several things that can occur as a result of heavy stress. One of them, I'm not going to try to pronounce this. There is a cardiothoracic, some kind of a disease that can occur where your heart literally gives up. Another is stress causes our immune systems to weaken. Our immune systems just absolutely get wreaked havoc on under heavy stress. A doctor says, you can die from stress. It increases your heart rate, your blood pressure, makes your heart work faster, and makes your blood sticky. It also ruins your immune system. Stress can wreak havoc on your health. This is from WebMD. And a common way to deal with stress that we deal with it, and common way that humans deal with it in general, is when you are really stressed out, imagine a situation where you're just dealing with something, you just don't know how to overcome it. Oftentimes we tend to bury our emotions and focus on something else, distract ourselves. Is that not so? I mean, work, TV, internet, whatever. You're very stressed out and you just want to take your mind off of that thing that is stressing you out. You want to bury it with something else, mask it. Now, it doesn't go away, but it does distract your mind from it. Jesus wasn't going to distract his mind from it. He did the exact opposite. instead of trying to distract himself from this emotion, this grief that he was feeling, trying to cheer himself up maybe, he goes to a quiet place in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus does the opposite of what we oftentimes do. So then Jesus and 11 of the disciples go to the garden, and he tells 8 of them to wait and keep a lookout. And then he asks 3 of the disciples, Peter and the brothers James, and John. So Peter, James, and John, he tells them to come with him. What is it about these 3 disciples that was so interesting? I want to focus our attention a little bit on these 3 gentlemen, Peter, James, and John, these 3 disciples. Why is it that Jesus selects these 3 specific disciples to go with him? It's a fascinating, fascinating idea. Well, first of all, there are a couple of different reasons. Why was it 3, first of all? Why did he choose 3 disciples and not just one, not just John, as John calls himself, the disciple that Jesus loved? Why just not take John with him? Or why just not take Peter? He was the pillar of the church, so why not take Peter? Well, you see, in those times, in the Old Testament as well as the New, a lot of the events, if you simply follow along the pattern of events, have witnesses of at least 3 people. Now, this is actually coming from the Old Testament. In Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 15, anything that is stated to be true, it says, anything that is stated to be true must be confirmed in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. So there needed to be at least 3 people to testify to this so that nobody can say that this did not occur. I think this is probably why all 4 gospel writers record this event, because you had 3 of the disciples there to witness this. Why was it those 3, though? Why was it specifically those 3 guys? Peter, James, and John. What was so special about them? Well, what was so special about them is that they were a part of what's called an inner circle, or what theologians oftentimes refer to as an inner circle of Jesus Christ's disciples. They were the 3. They were among the 4 original disciples. Peter, Andrew, John, and James were the first 4 disciples that Jesus chose. So they were among those 4. Number 1. Number 2, and this is, I think, a key point in this. As we recall the story of the Transfiguration, Преображение in Russian, of the story when Jesus went up to the mountains of Transfiguration and revealed his glory to the disciples. Which of the 3 disciples was it that were with him? Now let's read. Matthew chapter 17, verse 1 through 3. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them, преображен. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. And then we'll read that God himself speaks about Jesus to these disciples in their presence. This is my son whom I love, with whom I'm well pleased. So there at this mountain of transfiguration, Jesus is revealed as being divine to these 3 disciples. His divinity, his holiness, his godliness, the fact that he is God is revealed to them on this mountain. Jesus is 100% God. These 3 disciples witnessed that fact. What's so interesting about Gethsemane is that Jesus reveals something else about his nature. Remember what we talked about. The reason why we can relate to this story so much at the Garden of Gethsemane is because we see those human emotions that Jesus Christ experienced, his anguish, his sorrow, his sweat like the blood, as we will read later. We see those things and we relate to them on a human level. And Jesus Christ revealed his humanity at the Garden of Gethsemane. He revealed that he was both 100% God at the Mountain of Transfigurations, and he revealed that he was 100% man at the Garden of Gethsemane. And it was to these same 3 disciples. It's fascinating. So Jesus takes these 3 disciples with him to Gethsemane. And he tells them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Matthew 26:38. Stay here and keep watch with me. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. And in Luke, we read that he went away from them after saying these words, just a stone's throw away. So he was still within their vision. They could still see him. So he said, keep watch and pray. And then we read in another account in Luke, he also told them, he said to them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. Now this is an interesting verse because oftentimes it gets misinterpreted. People say, well, he took the 3 disciples with him because Jesus had such a heavy burden about what he was about to experience, and he needed companionship. He needed people around him and to pray for him. And he wanted them to pray for him and strengthen him, and he needed this help. But that's not what the scriptures say. He did not tell them to pray about him. Jesus takes these 3, even though he has this anguish on his heart, he doesn't tell them to pray about Jesus. He tells them, pray that you, disciples, may not enter into temptation. And 2 of the Gospels that record the fact that he said this say exactly the same thing. Pray that you may not enter into temptation. And he repeats this again when he finds them asleep and after coming back. Temptation from what? That's the question that I had. Is he just giving them kind of a random and general guidance? Pray because, sin is at your door and you have to be vigilant. Is that what he's saying? The same thing that we read many times in the Bible, telling us, be vigilant because sin is knocking at your door. Is that what he's telling him? Just kind of a general guidance? Or is he telling him to pray about some specific temptation that they're about to face? I think it's probably the latter, because of how much emphasis he puts on this. He comes back, finds them asleep, and again tells them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. What was this temptation he was talking about? Now, they were going to face a lot of different temptations, don't get me wrong. They were going to face, we read that after he was crucified, they were depressed. They didn't know what to do. So there was that temptation. There was temptation of persecution in the future. There were a lot of temptations that they were going to face, but something was about to happen that specifically they needed to fight off. This urge to do something that Jesus told them, you need to pray to avoid doing this. And to understand that, we need to understand who those 3 disciples were. Let's think a little bit about Peter, James, and John. What do you know about the character of those 3 disciples? Well, let's think about Peter. What are some of the most colorful events that happen with Peter and Jesus? What's the most colorful event that usually you think of? Denial, yes, absolutely. And we'll read into that a little bit. But also remember this very stern word that Jesus tells Peter. What does he call Peter? He calls him Satan. Peter, the pillar, the church, or the rock of the church. He calls him Satan. Remember that event? Let's read about that. Matthew 16:21 through 23. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the 3rd day be raised to life. So this is Jesus explaining to his disciples that he's going to die and he's going to have to be resurrected in 3 days after that, but the fact is he's going to be killed. Peter, upon hearing these words, this is his beloved teacher, he says, Peter took him aside and started to rebuke Jesus, his teacher, the Son of God. Never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. He says, you care too much about me. I need to fulfill the will of God. I need to fulfill the mission for which I'm sent here. Peter was a very stubborn man, as we read about. He had a very strong will, maybe would be the more proper way to say it. Had a very strong will. As you may remember, he does another very colorful thing right after Jesus was actually captured. Remember what he does? he pulls out his sword, draws it, and strikes the high priest's servant's ear off. Well, as they were about to take Jesus, he's trying to protect Jesus. Now, Jesus told them already, hey, I'm supposed to die. I'm supposed to be resurrected. This is my mission here. This is the will of God. And Peter tries to prevent him from doing that before, and he's trying to prevent him from doing that now. He had a very strong-willed personality. And Jesus again rebukes him. So Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into the sheath, Peter. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? This was his destiny. This was Jesus' destiny. And Peter, time and time again, tries to prevent Jesus from fulfilling his destiny. He was a very strong-willed man. A lot of commentators think that what Jesus was referring to when he is talking about praying to not fall into temptation was exactly that thing. That Jesus was about to face the ultimate test. He was about to be betrayed and given up, and that the disciples needed to agree with that will. They needed to understand and agree with the fact that this is his mission on here. And no matter how much they love him, no matter how much they want to spend their time with him, he had a higher purpose here, and they must trust him. They had to place their will of wanting to be with their beloved teacher below the will of God. The will of God should have taken precedence. This was a temptation for them, especially Peter, and especially James and John as well. John was also a disciple who Jesus loved. James, his brother. There's an interesting thing recorded about the two brothers. Also a very colorful event in the Bible. James and John. It's in Luke chapter 9, verse 52 through 53, and then 54 and 55. And he sent messengers ahead of him. So this is Jesus sending messengers, who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him, because his face was set toward Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, just as Elijah did? But Jesus turned to them and said, you do not know what manner of spirit you are. So these are the types of guys we're talking about. When people didn't want to receive him in a village, they turned to Jesus and say, hey, let's ask God to murder them. They're very fiery, strong-willed individuals as well. In fact, they were so strong-willed that Jesus had a nickname for them. People don't realize that these two actually had a specific nickname. Does anybody know what the nickname was? Sons of Thunder. That's exactly right. Mark chapter 3, verse 17. James, the son of Zebedee. This is the list of disciples. James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges. I don't know how you pronounce that. That is, sons of thunder. Syny Gromovi. They had a very firecracker-type personality. And Jesus takes these three. There isn't much comparison to these three from the other disciples. And he takes these three with him to the Garden of Gethsemane. He's trying to teach him something. Teach him to trust him and teach him the importance of prayer. And it is interesting to note that two of those disciples, John and Peter, were later said in Galatians chapter 2, verse 19, to be the pillars of the church. It actually says James, Peter, and John, but that James was a different James. That was James, the brother of Jesus. It wasn't this James. But John, because we know that because James was already killed by that time. But John and Peter were considered to be the pillars of the church. They played a very important role within the church. And Galatians records that. So what do we learn? What do we learn from all of this so far? Well, one is that we need to subdue our will. We need to be willing to subdue what we want. No matter how good it seems, we need to be willing to subdue what we want and allow God's will to dictate everything in our life. We also need to learn not to take matters into our own hands. We read about that as well with Peter trying to take matters into his own hands time and time again, telling Jesus, rebuking him, taking a sword, striking somebody's ear off. Don't take matters into your own hands. First, ask God for his will. And if it is in accordance with his will, then you can take matters into your hands. But don't put your will above that of God. And so we continue on with the story. So Jesus leaves the three, tells them to keep watch and pray, and then goes not far from them, and he falls on his face to the ground. In Matthew, we read that he simply kneels down, but then in Luke, it actually says that he falls on his face to the ground, and he prays. And what does he say? He says, "My Father, if it is possible," I think I skipped this verse in there, but he says, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." He says, in other words, if there is another way, if there is any other way from doing this, from fulfilling your justice, than having me take on the sins of the entire world up on the cross, then do that thing. But not as I will, but as you will. You see, Jesus Christ's death on the cross was the only way to satisfy God's justice. Jesus asks his Father if there is anything else that can be done. Use that instead. But there was nothing else. This was the thing. This was the only thing that would fulfill the justice of God. The Son of God himself, an infinite God, taking on infinite sin. And I say that because Jesus Christ, it says, drank from the cup of wrath. Thus the Lord, in Jeremiah 25:15, we read, "Thus the Lord, the God of Israel, said to me, take from my hand this cup of the wine of wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it." Jesus Christ took the sin of the entire world, past, present, future. He is the propitiation for our sins, in 1 John we read. And not for ours only, but also for the sins of the whole world. Isaiah 53:6, "The Lord has laid on him the sin of us all." So he was to take this entire sin on himself. There was no other way. There was no one else. There was no other way that could be satisfied. The justice of God and the wrath of God could be satisfied except through the cross and Jesus Christ on that cross. There was no other way. So Jesus asks for this cup to pass from him, but says, ultimately, whatever your will is, that's I'm okay with that. And as he says that, he prays for an hour. He comes back, and what does he find with disciples? Disciples they're sleeping. Now, a lot of people reading this passage, they go, man, those disciples, how could they just be sleeping? I mean, come on, this is your rabbi. Give him some, you can see that he's in pain. They're just so indifferent. These guys they just don't care. But that's not really what we read if you read a little closely. It wasn't that they were indifferent. It wasn't that they were just, it's okay, Jesus is off doing his own thing. We're just going to relax here, talk, shop, and then go to sleep and go back home after all is said and done. No, remember the context. They're aware that Jesus is about to die. They know this. They know that one of them is going to betray him. They have deep sorrow on their hearts. And it's in this context that they fall asleep. How can you fall asleep under such conditions? Well, those of us who have experienced some grief and some deep sorrow in our lives know what that can be like, this depression. And what does it do? It oftentimes paralyzes you, does it not? Oftentimes all you want to do is just simply lay on your bed and just fall asleep, not think about it. Some of us distract ourselves, but oftentimes if the pain is so great, you just want to go to sleep. Just don't want to think about it. And Luke says that that's exactly what happened. He says they fell asleep from sorrow. From sorrow. They didn't simply fall asleep. They fell asleep because they were so exhausted thinking about these things. But still, Jesus comes and he says, "You are sleeping? Why are you sleeping?" When he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping from sorrow. It should be from, not for. From sorrow. "Simon," he said to Peter. This is in Mark. In Matthew and Luke, it's simply recorded as him directing this towards all of them, all three of them. But in Mark, he says, "Simon," he said to Peter, "are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation? The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Simon, Peter, you are the guy that just, and like 2 hours ago maybe, before they were still at the Last Supper, who was telling me that there is no way you will ever deny me. And you fell asleep? From sorrow or not, you fell asleep when I told you to keep watch. I told you that you need this. You are the one that need this, not I. Jesus Christ did not need the help of his disciples. He was a sovereign God. He was able to withstand any temptation by himself. He didn't need human help. They needed this. He brought them there to teach them a lesson. And he says, you need to be praying so that you don't fall into temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So again, key takeaway is disciples were not just indifferent. They were falling asleep from just being exhausted from having the sorrow in their hearts. It was hard for the disciples. But that is precisely why they needed to pray. And have you heard this saying before? It is at times when you don't want to pray that you need to pray. It is at those times that you really need to pray. Because if you don't desire to pray as a Christian, if you don't desire to have this fellowship with God and bring your anguish onto him, there's a problem. You need prayer at that time. That's when you need to pray. When your body maybe tells you that you want to do something else, but pray, sleep, watch TV, distract yourself, that is when you need prayer the most. That is why Jesus said, the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. Overcome your body. Jesus understood they were in agony, but his agony was even worse. And this is a key thing to understand. Now, they fell asleep from sorrow. And imagine Jesus. Jesus knew that he was about to take on the sin of the entire world. They were about to lose their beloved teacher. He was about to lose their life, and not only his life, but his fellowship with his Father. Take on the sin of the entire world. He was far more grieved than them, and we know this because he was in such agony that he was close to death, as we read. In fact, he was in such agony that God sends an angel to help him. Luke 12, 43, 44. And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. Interesting verse. There appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. Why did an angel from heaven appear to strengthen him? Did he need spiritual help? Was he about to give in to his temptation of not fulfilling his mission, maybe? Is this why God needed to send someone else to do this for him? No, of course not. This was Jesus doing this on his own account. But Jesus needed physical strength, literally physical strength. Now, how do I know that this was physical help that angel gave him? Because it says, after angel came to strengthen him, what did Jesus do? Did he all of a sudden become this burden lifted off his shoulders or what? No. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. So after angel came, he prayed even more. And that's when his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. That's when he was able to pray even more. Christ's prayer did not deliver him from the suffering he was about to endure. That was never the point. Christ's prayer was meant to deliver him through the suffering. The angel did not take away his misery. He gave him strength. He gives him physical strength. And this is why Jesus also says, the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. The body can't stand this kind of anguish. Now, the importance, I just want to focus our attention on the importance of all of this. Why is it important to pay attention to how Jesus acted here? Because it gives us a framework, a guideline of how we are to act in similar type situations. And not only in similar type situations, but also through temptation and through grief and suffering as well. The story of Christ's prayer in the garden is a reminder to us about the tremendous power, the power of prayer. Recall when Jesus was tested and tempted by Satan in the desert. What did Jesus do then? Jesus used Scripture, the Word of God, to answer Satan. And when Jesus needed strength to overcome through a suffering, he relied on prayer. In the beginning of his ministry and the end of his ministry, word and prayer. What a great reminder for us. He overcame it, this temptation. His disciples did not. The 3 disciples did not. 3 times they failed the test because Jesus tells them, why are you sleeping? Watch and pray 3 times. Tells them, goes back to pray, prays, comes back, they're sleeping. Goes again, comes back. And then he finally wakes them up and says, told you to keep watch? Well, there's soldiers already coming. Rise. So this story is about the divinity and humanity of Jesus. It's a tremendous passage. The story of the Garden of Gethsemane reveals to us the start of the suffering that Jesus was about to endure as a man in the flesh. And it's important, this humanity aspect is extremely important for us to understand. Because through that, we have so many promises fulfilled. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13 says, no temptation has overtaken you except that which is common to mankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you're tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. Jesus knows this personally because he was here in the flesh. He experienced this in the flesh. He knows this personally. He knows how hard it is to be tempted. Moreover, he knows what it's like to endure human suffering and pain. He lost a good friend, Lazarus, when he was here. He was mourning for his friend. He experienced those feelings. And that's important because in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, we read that, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Again, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses. He is able to empathize with our weaknesses. But we have one who has been tempted in every way. So as we're going through suffering maybe, as we're going through pain, as we're going through temptation, realize that the proper response to that is to put our anguish and to put our weakness onto God, just as Jesus Christ did. And that when we want to pray the least, that is when we need to pray the most. Therefore, in our temptation, we need to come to God through prayer. In our suffering, we need to come to God in prayer. If you're going through pain, prayer. And if you have no strength for prayer, what is the answer? Prayer. When you feel like praying the least, that is when you need it the most. Amen? Amen. Let us stand in prayer. Dear Lord, you are the source of our salvation, Lord. You are the source of our strength. You are the source of everything that is good, Lord. And Lord, let us never forget that we need to come to you as the source of all these things when we lack the strength. When we lack the strength to overcome temptation. When we are stricken by anguish or suffering or pain, Lord. Lord, let us use this example of Jesus Christ in casting these things onto you, Lord. For you are faithful to help. Faithful to help us come through these temptations, Lord, and be victorious. Lord, I ask you to please speak to anyone here who may need to hear these words, Lord, whether they're going through difficult times now, or, Lord, if they don't know you, and if they continue to rely on their own efforts and on their own distractions and busyness or whatever, Lord, to distract themselves from their reality. Lord, let them come to you and realize that you are a great comforter, Lord. Lord, I ask you to please be with us for the duration of this service. We praise your holy name. Amen.
Brothers and sisters, we're going to continue our worship with our band, and right after the first song, we're going to have an offering.
Мой Господь, этот час я склоняюсь над Ним, и все нужды мои приношу я Тебе. Жизнь боль и тревогу лишь меня. Пусть ты знаешь мой голос от Тебя. Ты Господь, моя любовь моя. Щит мой и скала, ты моя защита и опора. Ты Господь, моя любовь моя. Тебе укроюсь я, ты моя защита и опора. Не страшна без тобой даже смертная тень, обрету я покой. Солнечный день, знай слезы мои, снова вовнешь. Все ошибки пути, простишь пойдешь. Ты Господь, моя любовь моя, щит мой и скала, ты моя защита и опора. Ты Господь, моя любовь моя, Тебе укроюсь я, ты моя защита и опора. А пока на земле буду славить Тебя, буду сердцем я петь, ожидая Тебя. Знай, скоро придешь, скоро встречу Тебя.
Дорогой Господь, благодарим Тебя за вечернее собрание, за всех нас, которые возревновали и пришли, Господь, на это служение, за Слово Твое. Благодарим Тебя за пение, Господи, что Ты наш Господь и Спаситель, Тебе слава. Благослови, пожалуйста, нас сейчас в этом материальном служении, чтобы мы послужили для Твоей славы. Аминь.
Final song, we're going to stand and worship Lord together.
There was one when I was young who knew my heart, he knew my sorrow, he held my hand and he led me to trust him. Now I am in the safety of your love. I trust your heart and your intentions. Trust you completely. I'm listening intently. You'll guide me through these many shadows. As I grow and as I change, may I love you more deeply. I will lean upon your grace. I will lean because your goodness is unending. You are my vision. Reason for living, your kindness leads me to repentance. I can't explain it. This sweet assurance, I've never known this kind of feeling. I can't explain it. This sweet assurance, I've never known this kind of feeling. The sun, moon, and stars shout your name. They give you reverence, and I will do the same. With all my heart, I give you glory. The sun, moon and stars, they shout your name. They give you reverence, and I will do the same. With all my heart, I give you glory. I want to seek you first. I want to know you more. I want to give you the honor you deserve. So I'll bow before you. I'm overcome by the beauty of this perfect love. Now I am hidden, the safety of your love. I trust your heart and your intentions. Trust you completely. I'm listening intently. You'll guide me through these many shadows.
What a wonderful grand finale, right, for this service. I think you probably maybe slated for just a few minutes. We heard a great sermon about the three disciples. And we know that Peter was the rock, and James was the son of thunder. And we are all disciples of Jesus. And sometimes I wonder if Jesus were to give me a name, or if he were to look at my life, how would he describe me personally, or you? Have you ever thought about that? how important it is for us to live the life He wants us to live, right? To represent Him well. Another point that I got from the message is that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Sometimes we try to take things into our own hands. And when we try to take things into our own hands, what happens? We rely on ourselves, we rely on our flesh, but the flesh is weak. So I think we have some homework to do for the upcoming week, right? A few announcements for the upcoming week, for the next 7 days for the church. Next Sunday, in Slavic churches, we celebrate the baptism of Jesus. And we, as the Slavic community here in Sacramento, will be celebrating the baptism of Jesus. And in addition, we are going to have new members joining our church. We're going to have a baptism, and we also will have a communion as well. Next Sunday, the 19th. On Saturday mornings, we also have prayers here at the church's library, and the church meetings are led by Brother Kapakli, Nikolai Kapakli. So if you are available to join the prayer groups, you're welcome to join Saturday mornings here in the library. Those couples that are married or those who are engaged, February is a wonderful month when traditionally we at our church have kind of a meeting together of married couples. And on the 15th of February, on Saturday the 15th, we're going to have another Family Harmony event. And we welcome everyone. There is no limit to your age. If you're happily married, please join us. And if you're engaged, also you're welcome to attend. And at the end of the service, Brother Vasilenko will have one more announcement.
Еще одно объявление. В феврале мы планируем иметь наше годовое членское собрание. И есть такое предложение, чтобы члены церкви, так как есть вопросы, разные вопросы, поэтому можно эти вопросы озвучить в записках сначала, да? Написать записки, подписаться, кто мы есть, и передать братьям или положить там в конце зала у нас ящик есть. Если вы хотите, чтобы ваш вопрос как-то был услышан, поэтому напишите свое имя, фамилия, имя, отчество, можно с отчеством. И тогда братья будут на братском, на пастырском рассмотрят эти вопросы и вынесут их на членское собрание, чтобы мы на членском собрании могли более продуктивно поработать. Такое пожелание. Возьмите во внимание. Я думаю, что это будет благословением для всех нас, для спокойствия, для мира. Будет полезно таким образом пойти нам. Если есть приветы нашей церкви, вы можете передать. Если нет, Эджвуд приветствует нас. Если нет больше приветов, вставший, поблагодарим за этот привет. Сердечно благодарим и от Первой Славянской привет передавать просим. Господь, мы благодарны Тебе, что Ты есть Бог всемогущий, Бог видящий и слышащий. Мы благодарны, что, Господь, Ты видишь каждого из нас, Ты видишь наше хождение, Господь, и Ты через Свое Слово исправляешь нас, Ты научаешь нас, Ты ведешь нас, Господи, именно тем путем, по которому мы должны ходить. Господь, я прошу Тебя, чтобы Ты благословил нас, как поместную церковь, чтобы мы могли каждый исполнить то предназначение, к чему Ты каждого из нас позвал. Господи, мы хотим быть полезными, эффективными в теле Твоем, мы не хотим быть бездейственными, мы хотим приносить, Господи, пользу телу Твоему и славу имени Твоему здесь на земле и в вечности. Господь, поэтому благослови каждого из нас в отдельности, как члена церкви и как поместную церковь. Благослови, чтобы мы могли достойно прославлять Тебя не только когда мы собираемся здесь вместе, но и также в нашей повседневной жизни, где мы находимся, на учебе, на работе нашей. Господи, благослови, чтобы мы действительно были этим городом, стоящим на вершине горы, чтобы мы были светильниками Твоими здесь на земле, и чтобы люди, они, видя этот свет, влекомые этим светом, приходили бы к Тебе и склонялись пред лицом Твоим. Господи, я прошу Тебя, чтобы Ты благословил всю эту предстоящую неделю, чтобы Ты сохранил нас в руке Своей от всякого зла, чтобы нигде мы не потерпели никакого вреда, ущерба. Пусть милость Твоя сопровождает нас непрестанно во имя Иисуса Христа, мы это просим. Благодать Господа нашего Иисуса Христа и любовь Бога Отца и общение Святого Духа да пребудет со всеми нами. Аминь. Приветствуйте друг друга с миром Божьим.